Lust was never the problem. It's deeper than you think. What if everything you've been told about lust is wrong? What if the real battle isn't about what your body wants, but about what your soul has been craving all along? There's a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when temptation doesn't look evil. It looks like relief. It whispers, "Just this once, you'll feel better." And for a second you believe it. You give in, and for a fleeting instant, the noise inside you fades. But then comes the silence, a heavy, hollow silence that reminds you this wasn't satisfaction. It was substitution. You didn't fall because you were weak. You reached because you were empty. You see, lust is rarely about pleasure. It's about pain, the kind you never learned to name, the kind that hides under loneliness, rejection, and years of unspoken shame. Most people think lust begins in the body, but it begins in the absence of love. When intimacy is missing, the soul starts searching for it in shadows. It builds illusions of closeness, through screens, through fantasy, through people who were never meant to carry the weight of our emptiness. Lust isn't the disease, it's the symptom, the surface crack of something deeper breaking inside. And here's the truth that religion rarely says aloud. God isn't angry because you feel desire. He created desire. What grieves him is watching you seek divine intimacy through human substitutes. You weren't created for counterfeit affection. You were created for connection so real, it heals you. So whole, it silences the craving. But when you forget that truth, lust becomes the drug you take to forget your hunger for heaven. You don't crave bodies, you crave belonging. You crave to be known without fear, seen without shame, loved without conditions. Every person you've ever chased in secret, every habit that's left you feeling hollow, they weren't the problem. They were the proof that somewhere deep inside, you're starving for something sacred. The body tries to fill what the spirit lacks. And when the spirit is dry, the flesh begins to burn. That's why it never lasts. The high of lust is just the echo of a deeper cry, the cry to be whole again. Think about the moments right after you fall into it. The guilt that comes, the prayer that follows, the promise that this time will be the last, yet the cycle repeats. Not because you're hopeless, but because you're fighting the wrong battle. You're treating symptoms instead of healing the wound. The war isn't against your flesh, it's for your heart. Because when the heart is disconnected from its source, it seeks substitutes to survive. And this is where the enemy works best. He doesn't tempt you with what's evil, he tempts you with what feels like love. He disguises pain as passion. He feeds you quick pleasure so you'll stop searching for eternal fulfillment. But beneath every craving is the same ancient ache, the one that began when man first walked away from Eden. From that moment, every human heart has been trying to return home. Lust is just one of the roads we take when we forget the way back. The truth is, you don't need to fight lust harder. You need to understand what it's hiding. Lust isn't a monster to kill, it's a messenger pointing to what's missing. And until you see the message, you'll keep attacking the shadow instead of healing the source. You'll pray for purity, but what your heart really needs is intimacy, not the kind that ends when the screen goes dark, but the kind that begins when your soul opens up to God again. So, before we go deeper, pause for a moment. Ask yourself, what is it that you're truly hungry for? Is it pleasure or peace? Is it control or connection? Because lust will always promise the first and steal the second. It will give you the sensation of being alive while draining the very life within you. But today you'll see it for what it really is, not your enemy, but your alarm. The signal that your heart has been searching in all the wrong places for the love it was created to receive from one source only. And if you stay with me through this message, something in you will shift. You'll stop condemning yourself for the symptom and start healing the cause. You'll begin to understand that the pull of lust isn't proof of how far you've fallen. It's proof of how deeply you were made to love, because the problem was never lust. The problem was the distance between you and the love that made you whole. Every temptation begins with hunger. Not physical hunger, but a spiritual one. Subtle, quiet, and often ignored. It's that ache inside you that can't be satisfied by achievement, success, or even relationships. It's the void that opens when life feels too heavy and your soul whispers, "Something's missing." That whisper is not sin. It's your soul reminding you that it was made for intimacy. Not the kind that begins in the body, but the kind that begins in the spirit. Lust is one of the loudest ways this hunger speaks. It's the soul's attempt to feed on what it was never designed to digest. The body becomes the stage where the heart's starvation plays out. You can discipline yourself, fast, block every image, and still feel that gnawing emptiness inside, because the true hunger was never for pleasure, it was for presence, the presence of God. And when that presence feels distant, the flesh goes searching for substitutes. From the moment humanity was separated from Eden, a famine began. Not of bread or water, but of divine closeness. We inherited that emptiness. Every human carries it, that internal gap between what we feel and what we long for. That's why even the most passionate night leaves people lonelier by morning. The body can be touched while the soul remains untouched. You can be held and still feel unseen. You can be desired and still feel unloved, because what you were designed for is not stimulation, it's connection. When David wrote, "My soul thirsts for you in a dry and weary land," he was describing the same hunger you feel when you're alone with your thoughts. He wasn't exaggerating, he was confessing. David had everything: power, women, wealth. Yet he still cried out, "I am lonely and afflicted." The man who conquered nations couldn't conquer his own emptiness. And that's the truth most people never say aloud. The most dangerous hunger is not the one in your stomach, it's the one in your spirit. That hunger can either drive you closer to God or deeper into substitutes. The enemy knows this, which is why he doesn't need to make you evil, only empty. Because an empty heart will always chase after anything that promises to fill it. Lust, greed, distraction, they all start the same way, with hunger unmanaged. The devil doesn't attack your purity, he attacks your satisfaction. He knows that a heart filled with the presence of God has no room for his lies. So he keeps you hungry, but blind to what you're hungry for. You reach for pleasure when you actually need peace. You crave control when you actually need comfort. You search for someone to hold you when what you really need is someone to heal you. Every temptation is a misplaced appetite. Lust is simply love that has forgotten where home is. You've probably noticed this pattern. When you're spiritually nourished, temptation loses power. When your heart feels connected, the craving weakens. But when your spirit starves, when you're tired, disconnected, unseen, lust doesn't just knock, it barges in. It's not your weakness showing. It's your need screaming. You're not broken because you desire. You're broken because you're starving for something the world can't give you. What if, instead of hating your hunger, you started to listen to it? What if the craving was actually a compass, pointing you back to the one who can satisfy? Because no addiction, no fantasy, no relationship, and no image will ever replace the intimacy you were designed to have with God. Your soul was built for communion, not consumption. When you finally understand this, everything changes. You stop fighting lust as an enemy and start healing hunger as a wound. You begin to see that what you thought was a moral failure was actually a spiritual famine. And the only way to silence that hunger is not through suppression, but through connection. This is where the journey turns, from judgment to understanding, from fighting the flesh to feeding the spirit. Because once you recognize that your deepest temptation is only a reflection of your deepest thirst, you stop asking, "How do I stop this?" and begin asking, "What am I really missing?" That's when healing begins. When your emotions go unfed for too long, your body starts to speak for them. What you call temptation often begins as emotional starvation. You've held in pain, disappointment, loneliness, and unmet needs for so long that your soul begins to ache for release. And when that ache becomes too heavy to carry, it seeks the quickest comfort it can find through the body. That's how emotional hunger becomes physical desire. The body is not your enemy. It's simply the messenger, revealing what your heart has been hiding. Think about it. The times you feel most drawn to lust are rarely when your life feels full. They come when you're exhausted, unseen, rejected, or overwhelmed. In those moments, you're not really craving sex, you're craving safety. You're longing for a moment where you can feel wanted, even if it's an illusion. Lust is not born in the bedroom, it's born in the absence of belonging. Every craving is a coded message from your soul. I need to be loved. I need to feel alive again. But instead of turning toward healing, we turn toward what's easiest, the quick fix, the fleeting thrill. You can only ignore your emotional hunger for so long before your body begins to scream. That's why people who seem disciplined can still fall. You can have control, but if you lack connection, desire will always find a way to escape. Lust is like an alarm system. It doesn't just signal danger, it signals neglect. The same way physical hunger reminds you to eat, spiritual hunger reminds you to return home. But instead of sitting with the pain, instead of praying through the loneliness, we try to sedate it. We scroll, we escape, we consume. And for a moment the ache quiets until it comes back louder. Every act of lust is the body's attempt to touch what the heart feels it can't reach. That's why the relief never lasts. You can feed the body 1,000 times, but if the soul remains starved, the hunger will always return. That's the trap. Not that you enjoy pleasure, but that you mistake pleasure for peace. The two feel similar in the moment, but lead to opposite destinations. Pleasure without presence becomes poison. It numbs what it was meant to nourish. You might think you're addicted to desire, but you're actually addicted to distraction. Because stillness feels dangerous when your emotions are hungry. Silence feels suffocating when your heart hasn't been heard. So you reach for what's available. The body becomes the outlet for emotions you never gave language to. The need for love turns into lust. The need for validation turns into fantasy. The need for comfort turns into compulsion. It's not that your desires are evil, they're misdirected. They're crying out for attention, but you've been feeding them substitutes instead of sustenance. Jesus understood this better than anyone. When he met the Samaritan woman at the well, he didn't condemn her for her relationships. He looked past her behavior and saw her thirst. Whoever drinks the water I give will never thirst again. That's what he was saying. I know what you've been searching for, but what you need isn't found in another person. It's found in me. He saw through her pattern and spoke directly to her hunger. That's what he wants to do with you. Because when you trace your desires to their source, you'll find pain at the root. Somewhere along the way, your heart stopped believing it was worthy of love without performance. You started confusing intimacy with intensity. And the moment that happened, lust stepped in as a substitute teacher for love. It offered quick warmth to a soul that's been cold for too long. But that warmth fades fast and leaves you emptier each time. So what's the answer? Not suppression, not guilt, not endless resistance, but recognition. You must begin to see the connection between your emotional starvation and your physical cravings. The next time you feel that pull, pause. Ask yourself, what emotion is beneath this? What pain am I trying to escape? Because if you can name the hunger, you can feed it properly. God cannot heal what you keep misdiagnosing. Lust loses its power when you understand its language. It's not here to destroy you. It's here to expose what still needs love. And once you begin to meet those emotional needs through presence, prayer, and honest reflection, the craving for counterfeit comfort starts to lose its grip. Because a fed soul doesn't fall for scraps. Pleasure always makes the same promise: this will make you whole. It dresses itself as the cure for loneliness, the antidote for pain, the reward after exhaustion. But when you reach for it, when you taste it, you realize that pleasure doesn't heal, it hides. It numbs the wound for a moment and then reopens it wider than before. Lust promises peace, but leaves you restless. It promises connection, but leaves you empty. The tragedy is not that we fall for it once, but that we keep believing it might be different next time. This is the deception. Lust doesn't tempt you with evil. It tempts you with counterfeit good. It mimics what love feels like, without offering what love gives. The rush of dopamine feels like joy. The intensity feels like connection. The satisfaction feels like peace. But they are all mirages. The body feels full, but the soul remains starving. It's like drinking salt water. It quenches for a moment, but leaves you thirstier than before. The false promise of pleasure is that it offers control in moments when you feel powerless. It gives the illusion that you can create comfort on demand, that you can silence the ache whenever it gets too loud. And yet every time you take it, the silence after grows heavier. That's the cruel cycle. Pleasure feeds the pain it promises to fix. Each indulgence deepens the craving. Each craving strengthens the chain. That's why the more you chase pleasure, the less it satisfies. What once took a spark now needs a flame, and what once felt exciting now feels like survival. There's a reason sin often feels so comforting at first. Because it imitates what you were made for. You were created to feel alive, seen, and deeply connected. Pleasure mimics all of that for a moment. Without the commitment, without the vulnerability, without the divine presence that makes it real. The enemy knows this. He doesn't need to destroy you through obvious darkness. He just needs to distract you through artificial light. He doesn't whisper, "Come sin." He whispers, "Come rest." And you follow the voice, not realizing it's leading you further into exhaustion. Think about that moment right after, the moment when pleasure fades and the weight of it hits you. You know that feeling, the sudden emptiness, the heaviness in your chest, the quiet voice that says, "This isn't who I want to be." That's not condemnation, that's clarity. It's your soul remembering what real peace feels like. Because you were not made for fleeting highs, you were made for lasting wholeness. Every time pleasure leaves you emptier, God is reminding you that your heart wasn't designed for temporary satisfaction. It was designed for eternal intimacy. Pleasure offers escape, God offers encounter. Pleasure hides you, God heals you. Pleasure gives a momentary sense of being alive. God gives life itself. One fades when the screen goes dark. The other deepens every time you open your heart. This is the difference between stimulation and satisfaction. One leaves you craving more. The other leaves you complete. The psalmist wrote, "In your presence is fullness of joy." That means outside of his presence, joy will always come in fragments. You can chase new highs, new experiences, new people, but until your soul drinks from the source, everything else will taste like imitation. You'll keep returning to the same wells, expecting water and finding dust. And still God waits, not with anger, but with compassion. He knows how many times you've tried to fill yourself. He knows the cycle. He knows the weight of your guilt. But he also knows that once you taste the real thing, his peace, his presence, his love, every other substitute will lose its flavor. The false promise of pleasure is not just that it deceives you, but that it delays you. Every time you run back to it, you postpone the healing that could have begun. You stay stuck between craving and shame, longing for relief but avoiding restoration. But the moment you stop chasing pleasure and start seeking presence, the cycle begins to break. The pain that once drove you toward darkness will start to draw you toward light. So when that craving hits, don't ask, "How do I stop this?" Ask, What is this trying to replace? Because lust doesn't speak of evil, it speaks of emptiness. And once you fill that emptiness with the love of God, the false promise of pleasure loses its voice. Every act of lust begins in a moment of disconnection, not from morality, but from meaning. Something inside you feels separate, unseen, detached from love itself. It's the same ache Adam must have felt after the fall, the sudden awareness of nakedness, not just of body but of soul. That feeling of being exposed, yet unseen, surrounded, yet alone. Disconnection is the birthplace of every counterfeit desire. It's where the heart, no longer anchored in divine intimacy, begins to seek substitutes to remember what closeness feels like. When you're disconnected from love, your heart starts collecting replacements. Some find it in lust, others in work, others in control. But it's all the same wound, the absence of belonging. The moment love feels distant, lust becomes appealing, because at least lust offers immediacy. It promises closeness without risk. It says, you don't have to be known, you don't have to be vulnerable, just feel something. But feelings without connection are like fireworks in the dark, beautiful for a moment, then gone, leaving the night even darker than before. The wound of disconnection goes deeper than emotion. It's spiritual. When the soul loses its sense of communion with God, it starts looking for substitutes in creation. We begin to confuse the warmth of attraction with the warmth of presence, the rush of excitement with the peace of being seen. That's why no relationship, no image, no fantasy can heal the loneliness that disconnection creates. You can lie in someone's arms and still feel far from home. You can have everything you thought you wanted and still whisper, "Why do I feel so empty?" The enemy thrives in disconnection. His first strategy was isolation. In Eden, before the fall, humanity walked in perfect unity with God. No shame, no fear, no hiding. The serpent didn't need to destroy that union violently. He only needed to create doubt. Did God really say? That's how separation begins, not with rebellion, but with subtle mistrust. Once distance is created, shame fills the gap, and shame always drives you deeper into the very thing that created it. That's how lust gains power. It feeds on isolation. It grows in silence. It multiplies in secrecy. When you're disconnected from God, even good things start to lose meaning. Prayer feels like talking to a wall. Worship feels mechanical. Relationships feel demanding. And when meaning fades, the flesh takes over, searching for something, anything, that feels real. Lust becomes a counterfeit intimacy, an attempt to bridge the gap without crossing the distance. It's not love you're after. It's relief from the ache of separation. But here's the truth. The feeling of disconnection is not a sign that God left you. It's a sign that your heart forgot where He is. The presence of God never abandons you. It's your awareness of Him that drifts. He is still there, whispering beneath the noise, waiting in the stillness you keep avoiding. The wound of disconnection is healed not by trying harder, but by turning inward, by remembering that His Spirit still lives within you. The same Spirit that hovered over the chaos in Genesis now hovers over the chaos in your soul, waiting for your permission to bring order again. You were never meant to live disconnected. That's why the pain of separation hurts so much. It's unnatural to your design. The human soul was created to abide in love, to live from the inside out, not from craving to craving. Lust thrives when love feels absent, but it begins to die the moment you realize you were never abandoned. Even when you fell, even when you hid, God walked into the garden calling your name. He didn't ask, "What did you do?" He asked, "Where are you?" Because the problem was never behavior, it was distance. And His question wasn't for information. It was for invitation. You can hear that same question echoing in your heart right now. Where are you? Not because He doesn't know, but because He wants you to know. He's inviting you to step out of hiding, to let the walls down, to stop pretending you're okay. Because healing doesn't happen in isolation, it happens in connection. Every time you turn your gaze back to Him, every time you open your heart in honesty, the wound of disconnection begins to close. And that's the beginning of freedom. Not when you stop feeling tempted, but when you stop feeling alone. The craving loses power the moment you remember that you're still seen, still wanted, still loved. Lust may have entered through loneliness, but love will lead you out. The enemy rarely destroys through obvious evil. He's far more subtle. He distracts. His weapon isn't always fear or failure. It's fascination. He knows that if he can't pull you into rebellion, he'll keep you trapped in repetition. He doesn't have to make you abandon your faith, only your focus. Because if your eyes are fixed on pleasure, they're not fixed on purpose. Lust becomes one of his most effective tools, not because it feels sinful, but because it feels satisfying for a moment. It steals time, drains spiritual strength, and slowly replaces your calling with craving. When the devil tempted Jesus in the wilderness, notice that he didn't offer something obviously wicked. He offered shortcuts, stones to bread, power without obedience, glory without the cross. It's the same strategy he uses today. He whispers, "Why wait for intimacy when you can feel good now? Why depend on God when you can fill yourself?" The temptation is never just about desire, it's about direction. The enemy uses your desires to reroute your destiny. Every time you choose counterfeit comfort over divine calling, a small piece of purpose slips away unnoticed. It doesn't happen in one fall, it happens over time. Distraction disguised as relief. Lust doesn't attack your morality, it attacks your momentum. It drains the energy you were meant to use for creation and turns it into consumption. The time that was meant for prayer becomes recovery. The focus meant for vision becomes regret. Slowly, you stop building and start hiding. That's how the enemy wins, not by destroying your gifts, but by diverting them. Remember David. He was a warrior, anointed, called by God, but he fell when he stopped moving in his purpose. The Bible says, in the spring, when kings go off to war, David stayed in Jerusalem. He wasn't supposed to be idle. He was supposed to be leading. But in the stillness of disconnection, temptation found him. What began as a glance became a gaze, and what began as curiosity became captivity. The lesson isn't just about lust, it's about direction. When you lose sight of your mission, the enemy gives you a substitute to keep you occupied. Lust thrives in boredom and emptiness. It doesn't need chaos to grow, it only needs distraction. When your life lacks purpose, desire takes over, and what once served as passion now becomes poison. The same fire that could build can burn when it's misused. That's why God doesn't want to eliminate your desire, He wants to sanctify it. The goal is not suppression, but redirection. Desire isn't evil, it's energy, it just needs aim. Every time you surrender your focus to fleeting pleasure, you trade eternal purpose for temporary relief. You give up the eternal for the instant. That's why it's not enough to pray for freedom from temptation. You must walk in alignment with your calling. Purpose is the antidote to lust. A life burning with vision has no room for counterfeit fire. When you live driven by God's purpose, you're too occupied with building something real to be seduced by illusions. The enemy knows that, so he'll constantly distract you from your assignment with false intimacy, false urgency, false fulfillment. He'll keep your mind trapped in cycles of craving so you never step into your calling. That's why so many people live in frustration. They feel called but can't move forward, inspired but paralyzed. It's not because they lack faith, it's because their focus is fractured. You can't pursue the light while staring at shadows. But here's the good news. The same desire the enemy uses to distract you, God can use to direct you. The same passion that led you into temptation can lead you into purpose once it's purified. When you bring your desires back under divine alignment, what once enslaved you begins to serve you. The fire that once burned you begins to refine you. That's how redemption works. God doesn't waste desire, He transforms it. If you want to break the enemy's control, don't just fight the temptation, starve the distraction. Fill the space he uses to whisper with worship. Replace the time he steals with purpose. Every time you choose calling over craving, your spirit grows stronger, and the enemy's hold weakens, because he can only control what captures your attention. So ask yourself now, where is your focus? Are you feeding your purpose or feeding your pain? Because your eyes will always determine your direction, and if you fix them on what's eternal, no temporary pleasure will ever be enough to pull you away again. When Jesus spoke about lust, his words pierced deeper than behavior. They exposed the heart. Whoever looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. For centuries, that verse has been used as a warning against sin. But Jesus wasn't just warning, he was revealing. He wasn't condemning human desire, he was redefining purity. Because purity, in his eyes, was never about distance from temptation. It was about intimacy with God. He didn't come to shame the sinner, he came to heal the disconnection that creates sin. Religious minds focused on the act, but Jesus went to the root. He saw that lust begins long before the body moves. It begins in a lonely thought, a hidden wound, an unmet need. He knew that if you try to fix behavior without healing the heart, the cycle will only repeat. That's why his teaching wasn't about control, it was about restoration. He wanted to show that purity isn't the absence of desire, it's the alignment of desire with love. When your heart is filled with divine intimacy, lust loses its power. The problem was never the eyes, it was what the eyes were searching for. Jesus was showing us that the real battle is not between holiness and lust, but between wholeness and fragmentation. When you are whole, you no longer need to take from others what God already gives in abundance. Lust happens when the heart forgets it's already loved. When Jesus said those words, he wasn't pointing to condemnation, he was pointing to freedom. Freedom that starts from the inside out. He wasn't saying, "You're guilty." He was saying, "You're hungry. Come and eat what truly satisfies." Look at the way he dealt with the adulterous woman. The religious leaders saw her as a symbol of impurity. Jesus saw her as a daughter who had forgotten her worth. They brought her to him to be judged. He stooped down, wrote in the dust, and said, "Let him who is without sin cast the first stone." He silenced the accusers, not because she was innocent, but because he came to restore what shame had stolen. He didn't say, "You are filthy." He said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." Those words weren't just forgiveness, they were healing. They redefined purity as belonging, not perfection. Purity isn't sterile, it's sacred. It's not about living untouched, it's about living connected. When Jesus looked at people, he didn't see their sin first, he saw their story. He understood that every sinful act was a symptom of separation, every temptation a search for love. That's why he never turned away from those the world called impure. He touched lepers, dined with sinners, spoke with outcasts. Every touch, every word, every encounter redefined what purity meant. It was no longer about clean hands. It was about a clean heart. A heart that could receive love without shame and give love without fear. The world says purity means restraint. Religion says purity means rule-keeping. But Jesus said purity means relationship. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. To see God isn't to escape the world, it's to see his presence in it, to see his reflection in yourself, in others, in every act of love. Purity is clarity. It's seeing things as God designed them to be. When your heart is pure, you no longer look at others as objects to satisfy your hunger, but as souls carrying the same breath of God that lives in you. That's true holiness, not separation from the world, but restoration within it. And this is where everything changes. Jesus didn't come to make you sinless through suppression. He came to make you whole through connection. He didn't ask you to fight your humanity. He asked you to redeem it. When he said, "The pure in heart shall see God," he was inviting you back to Eden, to that place of unbroken fellowship where love was natural and shame was unknown. That's why his way feels so different. It doesn't start with control, it starts with communion. If you've been taught to fear your own desires, hear this clearly. Your desires are not the enemy. Disconnection is. When you let the Spirit sanctify your desires instead of suppressing them, they become instruments of worship instead of weapons of destruction. Jesus came to realign the heart, not to reject it. Purity isn't about closing your eyes. It's about opening your heart to see God, even in the places you once felt unworthy to look. So maybe purity isn't what you thought it was. Maybe it's not about never being tempted, but about never walking alone. Maybe it's not about avoiding darkness, but carrying light into it. Because when you walk with Jesus, purity stops being a rule and becomes your reality, a reflection of the one who lives within you. Desire was never the problem. It was God's idea. Before sin entered the world, desire existed, pure, sacred, and creative. It was the spark that made Adam seek Eve, the longing that drew humanity toward relationship, beauty, and life. Desire in its original form was holy. It pointed upward, not inward. It was meant to lead you closer to the Creator, not further into craving. Disorder entered when desire lost its direction, when it began serving the self instead of serving love. That's what lust is. Desire without divine order. Its energy ungoverned by truth. We often think holiness means killing desire. But that's not true holiness. That's numbness. Holiness means healing desire, aligning it back with its purpose. God never asked you to live without passion. He asked you to purify it. Every longing inside you, for connection, for touch, for meaning, for joy, was designed to draw you toward Him. But when the heart drifts, that same longing gets distorted. Desire becomes disorder when it's detached from love. It starts feeding ego instead of soul, using instead of giving, consuming instead of creating. You can feel the difference between desire and disorder in your spirit. Desire leaves peace behind. Disorder leaves guilt. Desire expands your soul. Disorder empties it. One makes you more alive, the other makes you more restless. Pure desire leads to intimacy, not only with others, but with God. Disordered desire leads to addiction, constant chasing, never arriving. And this is the tragedy. Most people spend their lives trying to kill what God called good, when all they needed was to heal what sin had twisted. When Jesus walked the earth, He carried desire perfectly. He wept, laughed, embraced, and loved deeply. Yet His desires were always rooted in purpose. His humanity wasn't a threat to His divinity. It was a vessel for it. He showed us that to desire is not to sin, but to be human. And when humanity stays connected to heaven, desire becomes a form of worship. That's the kind of desire God wants to awaken in you, one that fuels holiness, not hides from it. So how does desire become disorder? It happens in subtle ways, when your desires stop being guided by truth and start being driven by emptiness. When what you want matters more than why you want it. When you pursue the feeling instead of the meaning. Disorder enters when pleasure replaces purpose, because every time you seek fulfillment outside of divine alignment, you disconnect the gift from the giver. You start to treat desire as a destination instead of a direction, and that's when it turns toxic. Think of fire. In a fireplace, it warms the home. Outside of it, it burns it down. The same fire that comforts can destroy when removed from its boundaries. Desire is the same way. When kept within love and surrender, it creates life. When left ungoverned, it consumes life. That's why God doesn't call you to extinguish passion, but to channel it. He wants you to stop fearing your own fire and start learning how to aim it. Because when your desire is purified, it becomes power. When it's left disordered, it becomes prison. So the question isn't, how do I stop desiring? The question is, what is this desire pointing to? All desire is directional. It either pulls you toward divine connection or pushes you into disconnection. When you begin to trace every craving back to its root, you'll find that what you really want isn't forbidden fruit, it's the taste of freedom. Every unholy desire hides a holy seed. The desire to touch comes from the deeper desire to be known. The desire to possess comes from the deeper desire to be secure. When you let God reorder those desires, He doesn't remove them. He redeems them. The psalmist wrote, "Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart." That verse isn't about God granting wishes. It's about transformation. When your delight is in Him, your desires are reshaped to match His. What once led you into lust now leads you into love. What once pulled you into addiction now pulls you into worship. You stop chasing what feels good and start pursuing what is good. And that's the difference between bondage and freedom. Not the absence of desire, but the presence of divine order. So if your desires have been leading you astray, don't despise them. Bring them to the altar. Let God reorder them. Let Him take what the enemy distorted and restore its original purpose. Because when desire finds its right direction, it becomes destiny. And you'll see that the passion you once thought was your downfall was always meant to be your drive, purified, refined, and aligned with heaven. You can't heal what you keep hiding, and you can't fix what you keep misnaming. Most people spend their lives fighting lust as if it were the enemy, but lust is only the echo. The real wound is underneath. Healing begins when you stop asking, "How do I stop this?" and start asking, "Where did this begin?" Because sin doesn't start in the act, it starts in the ache. That unspoken ache, the one that keeps you reaching for something temporary, is your soul's cry for connection. And until you face it, you'll keep returning to the same patterns, not because you're weak, but because you're wounded. The root cause of lust is rarely sexual. It's emotional, spiritual, and deeply human. Somewhere in your story, there's a moment, a fracture, a rejection, a silence, where love was expected but never arrived. Maybe it was a parent's absence, a betrayal, a heartbreak, or a season when you prayed and heaven seemed silent. Those moments create emotional vacancies, and the human heart, being what it is, tries to fill them. But when it can't find real intimacy, it settles for imitation. That's why lust feels both comforting and condemning at once. It gives a taste of belonging while reminding you that you're still lost. So healing the root means returning to the wound, not to relive it, but to redeem it. You must walk back to that place in your heart where pain entered and invite God to enter it with you, because the places you hide in shame are the very places He longs to touch with grace. The devil will tell you that healing requires perfection, that you have to be clean before you can come to God. But the truth is, you don't clean yourself to be healed. You come broken, and healing begins there. God cannot restore what you pretend is whole. To heal the root, you must embrace honesty, the kind of honesty that strips away all pretense and says, "God, here's my truth. I'm tired, I'm weak, I'm hurting, and I don't know how to stop." That kind of prayer opens the door for grace, because grace doesn't flow toward performance, it flows toward surrender. You can't overcome what you refuse to bring into the light. As long as your struggle stays secret, it stays strong. But the moment you speak it, in confession, in prayer, in vulnerability, its power begins to break. The second step is forgiveness. Healing isn't just about abstaining from lust. It's about releasing the pain that keeps it alive. Forgive those who wounded you, neglected you, or taught you that your worth was tied to your performance. Unforgiveness is the soil where temptation grows. Every unhealed memory becomes a seed of craving, craving for validation, control, or escape. But when you forgive, you uproot those seeds. You let God reclaim the ground of your heart. That's why Jesus linked forgiveness to freedom. Not because he wanted to make forgiveness easy, but because he knew it was necessary. Then comes renewal. You can't just remove sin, you must replace it. Every time you say no to lust, you must say yes to something greater. Otherwise, the void it leaves will pull you back in. Begin filling your life with spiritual rhythms, prayer, stillness, community, worship. Let these become your new sources of satisfaction. Rewiring the mind takes repetition, not just revelation. Every moment of temptation becomes an opportunity to practice intimacy with God instead of running from him. Over time, what once triggered shame will trigger prayer. The pattern begins to reverse. And in this process, don't confuse relapse with failure. Healing isn't a straight line. Sometimes God allows the struggle to remain so that humility stays alive. The thorn in Paul's flesh wasn't a punishment. It was a reminder of dependence. The fact that you still wrestle doesn't mean you're losing. It means you're healing. Because healing often looks like falling 7 times and standing up 8. The difference now is that each time you rise with more awareness, more compassion, more grace. Ultimately, the path to healing is not about control. It's about communion. It's not about resisting your humanity. It's about inviting God into it. When you let him enter the most hidden parts of your heart, the ones you've guarded out of shame, he transforms them from places of temptation into testimonies of restoration. Lust loses its power not when you hate yourself more, but when you love him deeper, because perfect love casts out fear. And fear is what drives every false desire. So if you want to heal, start here. Stop fighting symptoms and start seeking presence. Let God go where the pain began. Let him show you that your brokenness isn't a disqualification. It's the doorway to intimacy. You've spent enough time running from the wound. It's time to let the healer touch it. Because the same place where you once felt unworthy will become the place where grace makes you whole again. When the soul forgets how to rest in God, it begins to search for him in fragments. It looks for his touch in pleasure, his comfort in distraction, his peace in people who can't provide it. But no substitute can replace divine connection. The only real cure for lust, for emptiness, for that deep ache inside you, is intimacy with God. Not the kind that lives in your mind, but the kind that fills your spirit until even your desires are transformed. Because when your soul is truly fed, counterfeit pleasures lose their taste. Intimacy with God isn't a ritual, it's relationship. It's not about perfect prayer or religious performance. It's about presence. Think of how Jesus described it. Abide in me, and I in you. That word, abide, means remain, dwell, stay. It's not a command to strive, it's an invitation to rest. The more you abide, the more your soul learns to breathe again. Sin thrives in separation, but it suffocates in the presence of love. Lust only has power in the absence of intimacy. When your heart returns to the source, the hunger begins to heal. Restoring intimacy with God requires vulnerability. You can't connect deeply with someone while wearing armor, not even with your Creator. To be intimate is to be honest, to stand before him as you are, unfiltered, unpolished, undone. That's why true intimacy with God often begins in silence. In that quiet, where no mask can hide you and no distraction can protect you, something sacred happens. You start to feel seen again. The distance you felt wasn't his absence, it was your avoidance. He never left, you just stopped listening. It's in those moments of stillness that healing begins. When you pour out your heart, not rehearsed prayers but raw truth, You create space for him to pour his peace into the places you've kept locked. You can tell him everything, the failures, the thoughts, the temptations. He's not shocked by your darkness. He's waiting to flood it with light. The Psalms are filled with this kind of intimacy. David didn't pray as a saint, he prayed as a son. He brought his sin, his sorrow, and his longing into the presence of God and found not condemnation, but communion. To restore intimacy, you must learn to slow down. God's voice isn't found in the chaos, it's found in the quiet. Be still and know that I am God. Stillness isn't inactivity, it's invitation. When you quiet your mind, you give your heart room to feel his presence again. You begin to notice him in places you once overlooked. In the peace after prayer, in the warmth of forgiveness, in the gentle conviction that calls you closer, not further away. Lust numbs the senses, but love awakens them. The more aware you become of his presence, the less appeal sin has. Reconnection also happens through the Word. Scripture isn't just instruction, it's conversation. When you read it slowly, not to memorize but to listen, you'll hear his voice between the lines. You'll see that every page of the Bible is God reaching for intimacy with you. From Eden to Calvary, the story has always been about reunion, the Father bringing his children back home. When you let that truth sink in, worship stops being obligation and becomes overflow. Prayer stops being duty and becomes desire. Community is another doorway to intimacy with God. You were never meant to walk alone. Isolation fuels temptation, but connection sustains transformation. Find spaces where you can be honest, not perfect, not polished, just real. When you confess, when you share, when you allow others to walk with you, you're not showing weakness, you're choosing healing. God's presence often flows through people. The voice that prays with you, the friend who listens without judgment, they become reminders that divine love still reaches you through human hands. And most importantly, intimacy with God grows through consistency. You don't build relationship with random encounters. You build it through daily surrender. The mornings you open your Bible when you don't feel like it. The nights you pray, even when heaven feels silent. The moments you choose to trust instead of escape. Every one of those choices is an act of love. Over time, those small moments become the foundation of restoration, because the truth is, God never stopped wanting you. The distance you feel isn't a wall he built. It's one you built to protect yourself from pain. But his love is patient. It waits outside the door of your heart, knocking gently, saying, "If you open, I'll come in and dine with you." When you finally open that door, when you stop performing and start being present, the atmosphere inside you changes. The same body that once trembled under the weight of lust begins to tremble under the weight of his presence. The same eyes that once sought sin begin to seek his glory. And in that intimacy, you rediscover who you are. Not a failure trying to earn forgiveness, but a child learning to rest in love. That's when healing becomes permanent. Because once you've tasted real intimacy, you'll never settle for imitation again. Transformation doesn't happen through emotion alone, it happens through renewal. You can cry out to God, feel his presence, and still fall if your mind stays programmed by the old patterns. The spiritual battle isn't only fought in prayer, it's fought in thought. The Apostle Paul wrote, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." He didn't say, remove the mind. He said, renew it. Because the mind is not your enemy, it's your engine. If the heart is where the fire burns, the mind is where it's directed. To live free, you must rewire both. Every time you indulge in lust, your brain creates a pathway, a neurological groove carved by repetition and reward. The more you walk it, the deeper it gets. But renewal means building a new road, one that leads to peace instead of pleasure, connection instead of compulsion. This isn't about willpower, it's about rewiring. When you begin replacing lies with truth, reactions with reflection, and habit with holiness, your brain begins to heal. The same mind that once served your struggle becomes the instrument of your freedom. Renewal begins with awareness. You can't change what you don't notice. Start paying attention to what triggers your cravings, not just visually, but emotionally. Ask yourself, what state of mind precedes my temptation? Is it boredom, stress, loneliness? Once you identify it, you can intercept it. The goal isn't to feel less, it's to feel sooner, to catch the craving before it consumes you. When you pause, pray, and shift your focus to God's presence, you interrupt the old pattern. Every interruption is a small victory. Renewal is built one pause at a time. The second layer of renewal is replacement. The mind can't erase thoughts. It can only replace them. When lustful images arise, don't just say, "Stop thinking this." Replace the image with truth. Speak scripture out loud. Declare your identity. Redirect your focus. Every time Jesus was tempted, he didn't stay silent. He spoke the word. That wasn't superstition, it was strategy. The word of God reprograms your thought life. It's not a magic spell, it's mental surgery. Every verse you meditate on rewires your brain toward faith instead of fear, presence instead of pressure. Fasting is another tool of renewal. It teaches your mind and body that you are not ruled by appetite. Fasting doesn't make God love you more. It helps you love Him more clearly. It clears the fog. It trains your spirit to say no to the immediate so it can say yes to the eternal. Every time you fast, from food, media, or anything that numbs your awareness, you reclaim ground from the enemy. You remind your flesh who's in charge. Over time, fasting stops feeling like deprivation and starts feeling like detox, a cleansing of everything that once clouded your connection to God. Renewal also requires environment. You can't heal in the same atmosphere that made you sick. The people, places, and patterns that fed your old habits must change. Holiness is not about isolation, it's about intentionality. If your environment constantly fuels temptation, it's not holy resistance to leave it, it's holy wisdom. Don't test your weakness where it once thrived. Build a life that supports your new identity. Fill your time with things that give meaning. Serving, creating, connecting. Lust withers in a life filled with purpose. Worship is another form of rewiring. It shifts your focus from self to source. When you worship, you recalibrate your inner compass. The energy once used for craving becomes energy for communion. Worship doesn't just change how you feel, it changes how you think. It creates a rhythm of gratitude that weakens the grip of guilt. The more you worship, the less room shame has to speak, because worship reminds your mind what's real, that God's love is greater than your failure, that grace is stronger than your guilt. And finally, practice grace. Renewal is a process, not a performance. The mind learns through repetition, not perfection. Some days you'll feel strong, other days you'll fall. But every return to God is progress. Each time you choose prayer over pleasure, stillness over scrolling, confession over hiding, you are strengthening the neural and spiritual pathways of freedom. You're teaching your mind that peace feels better than pleasure, that love lasts longer than lust. The Holy Spirit is your greatest ally in this rewiring. He is not a distant force, he's your internal counselor. When you feel the old urge rise, whisper, "Spirit, help me see this differently." That prayer alone starts the transformation, because renewal doesn't come by suppressing desire, but by sanctifying it, reshaping it to serve the life God designed for you. The Spirit's role is to remind you of truth until your mind starts believing it more than your temptation. Over time, renewal becomes rhythm. You start thinking differently, feeling differently, choosing differently. What once enslaved you begins to bore you. What once triggered guilt now triggers gratitude. The mind that once chased sin now seeks peace. That's the fruit of renewal, not just freedom from lust, but freedom for life. When you strip everything away, the guilt, the fear, the striving, you begin to see the truth that was hidden beneath your struggle all along. Lust was never the enemy. It was the alarm, not the adversary. It was the signal that something inside you was starving for love, starving for presence, starving for the touch of God that no pleasure could imitate. The real enemy was disconnection. The real battle was never against your flesh. It was for your heart. Because once your heart reconnects with its creator, the cravings that once ruled you begin to lose their voice. Lust only grows in the soil of emptiness. When the soul feels unseen, unloved, and unanchored, it will chase anything that promises to fill the void. But the moment you remember who you are, loved, chosen, forgiven, whole, lust loses its authority. Its whispers sound weaker, its grip feels lighter. What once enslaved you becomes irrelevant in the presence of something real. Because the truth is, the cure for lust is not resistance, it's replacement. When your life becomes filled with light, darkness no longer has anywhere to hide. The enemy wanted you to believe that your desire made you dirty. But desire was never the sin. Disconnection was. You were designed to long for love, to crave intimacy, to hunger for union. But that hunger was meant to lead you to God, not away from Him. Lust took that longing and twisted its aim. But grace untwists what guilt distorts. Grace doesn't erase desire, it reorients it. It doesn't silence passion, it sanctifies it. The moment you understand that, shame begins to die. Because you realize that what felt like punishment was really an invitation. God using even your weakness to call you back home. Every fall, every failure, every night you thought you'd gone too far, none of it surprised Him. He saw it and still called you. He saw your pattern and still pursued you. That's the kind of love that heals, not the kind that waits for perfection, but the kind that steps into imperfection with compassion. The cross was never about making you ashamed of your humanity. It was about redeeming it. Jesus didn't die to erase your desires. He died to restore their direction. And now that same Spirit that raised Him from the dead lives in you, teaching you, guiding you, transforming you from within. This is the revelation. Your battle with lust was never proof of your distance from God. It was proof of His pursuit of you. He allowed you to feel the weight of emptiness so you'd search for fullness in Him. The ache you've been trying to silence was actually His voice whispering beneath the noise, "Come home." Every craving was a compass pointing you back to the source of satisfaction. Every fall was a reminder that you can't live disconnected from the one who gave you breath. So don't see yourself as a failure learning to fight lust. See yourself as a child learning to live loved. The war is not over your behavior, it's over your identity. The enemy wants you to believe you're bound by what you've done. God wants you to believe you're free because of what He's done. When you start living from that truth, you'll find that purity isn't a goal, it's a byproduct. You won't have to force holiness, you'll begin to flow in it. Because when your heart is filled with love, it naturally rejects everything that isn't love. Remember this, what you feed will grow. Feed guilt and shame will multiply. Feed grace and peace will flourish. Every day is an opportunity to choose connection over compulsion, presence over pleasure, intimacy over isolation. Freedom doesn't mean you'll never feel temptation again. It means temptation no longer defines you. You are no longer driven by what once destroyed you. You walk differently now, not because you've become stronger, but because you've become more surrendered. And that's the paradox of grace. You win the war not by fighting harder, but by resting deeper. Lust dies not by force, but by fulfillment. The heart that is full no longer chases crumbs. You are not who you were. You are being made new, renewed in mind, restored in spirit, and reconnected to love itself. If this message spoke to your heart, let it be more than words. Let it be your turning point. Share it with someone who's still fighting alone. Remind them the battle is not against the body, it's for the heart. And when the heart finds love, the body finds peace, because the truth will always remain. Lust was never the problem. Disconnection was, but connection, real, divine, unconditional connection, that's where your freedom begins, and that's where it will last forever.